Hey, AugMentors. I'm Julie.
And I'm Jimmy.
We know that great leaders have great mentors, and today we are joined by Gino Ferrand, a serial entrepreneur, a people leader, and founder of Tekla, a leading staffing platform.
Today, Gino helps us understand how to connect better with others by simply repeating, be humble. Start that way with each interaction. We are going to learn how to grow to our potential by avoiding self-sabotage. And Gino shares the number one reason why outsourced consultants fail when working for US-based companies. This entire episode is based upon the principle of resilience because different cultures and styles are key to an exciting life. However, it takes great leaders to understand how individual differences can be recognized and celebrated. Gino, here we go.
All right, Gino Ferrand, we are so happy to have you on AugMentors today. We're excited for a great conversation, talking about all kinds of different things from North America to South America, from hiring to talent development, and we are super excited for this conversation. So thank you very much for joining us today.
No, thank you guys for inviting me.
Gino, we have a question for you.
Yeah.
We have a question that we ask all our guests when they first come on the show to introduce themselves, is we know that mentors...
The question is, have you been in an igloo before?
Have you been in an igloo before? And do you know that there are igloos in Washington State? And I'm going to send you both a picture so that you can believe me, because I know you think I'm making it up. But shout out Gunther Oki. We built an igloo together. Besides that, Gino, going back, mentors are people who believed in you before you believed in yourself. And who was that for you? And what did they see?
I mean, when I was in high school, even, I was starting to tinker with like wanting to create a brand and sell online. And this was around like 2000, 2005, 2006. And my mom has always been the person that's been sort of listening, even from back then, to like the crazy ideas I had. And eventually, like, because I think of my excitement, she would come on board. Like, she's more of like the skeptic kind of person. So she would be like, okay, well, how are you going to do that? And, you know, not be too interested, I think, in my business idea as like a kid. But eventually, with my excitement, and this typically happens, I think, to most people that I tell ideas to, or like what I want to work on, is eventually they like buy in. And then I notice that like we're now on the same wavelength, they're like both as excited. So I'm like, okay, I think that person is now like they get it. And so yeah, my mom was always, she was like, I created when I was a senior in high school, I got injured. I was an athlete. I played a lot of soccer. That was my main sport, also basketball, but I mean, so coming from Peru, soccer is still my sport. And so I fractured my skull. It sounds worse than it was. So, I mean, it did hurt, but it was just like a head-to-head collision, really kind of freak accident.
Ouch.
Yeah. And so the recovery was fine, but I was out for the rest of the season. And I decided I wanted to
hope you mean you were awake, just not competing.
I was sidelined, but fully awake. And, you know, besides not being able to play, I felt fine and everything. I got it like really great. Actually, one of the players on the team, his dad was a nose and, you know, surgeon, and so he was the one that fixed the thing, this area right here, and did a pretty good job. Yeah, so then I actually went into jewelry making. I decided I'm going to take a jewelry making course because I can't play any sports.
Love it.
And then I started a jewelry line, and my mom helped me do, like, she was like, okay, well, everything I told her, she would help. So I was like, okay, well, I need to find a vendor for the stones. And she would you know, send me first. She would always be like, okay, sure, whatever. And then in my email, I would get, or text messages, I would get like her vendor ideas and stuff. So it's kind of like, she's always kind of like, okay, yeah, I'm sort of listening. But then after the conversation, she's like sending me potential vendors for stones and stuff like that. So it was, she's always been by my side.
Okay, I have two questions. One, are you an only child?
Kind of. So
okay.
My mom married twice. I have I have half siblings. I'm the only child of my mom and dad. But I'm guessing you're asking because of what I'm saying about my mom or something. Are you saying
no? Just because my experience has been that entrepreneurs, like most of my closest entrepreneur friends, are only children. And I think the idea of you spending time sitting with your mom, telling her your business ideas does definitely sound like an only child kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's why I asked.
So my older half sibling, the one I grew up with, he's 11 years older. So he was already in college when I was finished like in middle school. And this in high school, it was just me, my mom, and my stepdad. And we moved from Peru. I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico. So that's why the jewelry making to a very artsy town, and took a course with like a great kind of semi-retired, amazing jeweler that was living in Santa Fe. And he had a little workshop for like 6 people. I think it was 5 women and myself in the class.
And was your mom an entrepreneur? Was she a business owner?
Yeah, she didn't start the business, but back in Peru, my family had a steel mill, kind of like, selling metal plates for construction. So yeah, very also not a girly place, and the stereotypical, I don't want to say girly, and like there's a place for women and men, but definitely it was all men, laborers, back in like the 90s, with a lot of like shining path in Peru. It was a very scary time in Peru, and she was driving to work at this steel factory with her 2 brothers. So it was a family business. Her dad had started it. So her dad was the one that founded it, but then the 3 siblings took over. So it was my mom and her 2 brothers ran it. And it was pretty crazy going there. It was full on fights between the 3 and just like really intense business. So she'd leave the house at like 7 a.m. and get back home at like 8 or 9 p.m. because it was really far away to the factory. So she was a really hardworking person. Definitely I would say an entrepreneur, but she didn't start it, if that still counts. But
amazing. No, I think, I feel like we've seen that a lot. I think both Jimmy and I have moms that are that had been business owners, and then also only children. And thinking about some other entrepreneur friends, it's very common. And I have 2 daughters that are college age, and I figure they're going to go work at the post office because I'm constantly like, but don't you have a business idea? Like, don't you want to like grow something? What's your marketing plan? They're like, I'm just in high school. Like, I don't know that yet. So yeah, it kind of runs in the family, I think.
They have a lot of those. I don't have kids of my own yet, but I remember in school, like elementary school and middle school and high school, they have those like kind of like business fairs where you're supposed to come up with like businesses and stuff. So I don't know, do you think those are an indication? Do you think the entrepreneurs you've talked to, like they're like the type of people that were like, oh, I ran a lemonade stand when I was 5. And, like I hear people kind of tell stories like that they've been merchants their whole life and trying business.
Merchants.
Yeah.
I would actually say, Gino, we've found more that it's the mentors that probably are a better reflection of what the people will become. At least for me, I had no desires about going into business. I never even thought about it until I was about to start one with my previous boss, who was 30 years older than me. But a lot of my mentors and who I talked to were business owners. So it wasn't strange for me to suddenly start doing this.
Yeah.
Whereas, like I had the representation in my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there are some people that's like, yeah, I started a lemonade stand, sold it, moved on to cakes,
first exit,
sold that.
Put it on their LinkedIn. First exit, 7 years old.
$126.
Yes. It's an exit. You don't have to disclose the amount.
Yes. It sold it for a quarter, not a mil, just a quarter. Yeah.
Yeah, no, now that you say that makes a lot of sense, actually, because I'd never thought about it until just now, actually, that you said it. But my mom's brothers, then when the factory, like there was a whole credit crisis in Peru, so everyone restarted, so every business went out of business. And then my uncle like went on to start a scallop farming business, which he still runs. And then my other uncle went to fund like a credit union type of finance thing. And my dad also ran a store. It was like a home goods store. So I'd never thought about it, but now that you say it, all of the adults in my life were running a business. Even if it wasn't like tech entrepreneurs stuff, they're running their own businesses. Yeah.
So I was planning on asking you more about the differences between the United States and Latin America, but now I really want to get into the differences between the jewelry and the tech industry. How do you see similarities for yourself on being at a bench making jewelry compared to, being at a desk, work on a computer? Like, how did that, there's got to be some overlap in your brain.
Yeah. I mean, I think that obviously the skills, like the handcraft of actually making jewelry, can be a little bit different than designing a website or something in terms of it being more physical versus digital. But other than that, I think it's pretty similar on the product development side. And then I think that the number one lesson I took from that business was how important persistence was, because when I was younger, especially, I would have an idea, run it for like 6 months, and then have another idea, and then abandon the first idea. And so then when I started getting into my late 20s, kind of like a few years ago, really, I was like, I really need to stop just starting and stopping things, because the key to why Tekla was successful is that I kept running it since 2013 nonstop. So even if I had other ideas and other interests in my head, Tekla was my full time, and I kept running it. And then, you know, obviously that led to a lot of growth that isn't linear. So it's like maybe the first couple years are really tough, but then the third one is huge growth, and then maybe the fourth one a little slower, but the fifth one you did something, and marketing wise you figure it out, and the sixth and the seventh. And so it's not linear. And I think that with the jewelry thing, I always look back and said, oh, I really should have stuck with it longer. I should have tried different pricing things. That's something I take now to like, you can apply it to every business. I feel like it's like you got to persist a little bit, or take time to really figure it out before you drop it. Because there's not in like tech, especially, it's like, oh, pivot, or just drop it as soon as you don't find product market fit or something's negative. And it's like, I'm skeptical about that. It's like, okay, but when do you drop it? Because literally the next week something could happen that turns it around. So it's always hard to know when to drop it, I think.
And Gino, have you had mentors that have helped you with that? Like, how did you find mentors outside of maybe your family that were helping you kind of have those conversations or those discussions to help you make that decision about when to keep moving forward and maybe when to pivot?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of, first with Tekla, like my family, I think, being involved, like, everyone in my family knows what I do, what Tekla does, like my company. And so I think getting all of the people that I mentioned earlier involved in knowing what I was doing also keeps you more accountable, because then you can have those conversations, right? Like when you meet up with those mentors, then they're going to ask you how things are going. And it actually keeps you, it's huge, even just besides the actual conversation that you're going to have with them, that is obviously going to give you some great insights. Just the fact that that you have some accountability, even if it's to yourself, to something that you've been like, you're going to talk to someone about. And so some projects where I didn't involve mentors, like the jewelry one, it was more like, I was telling my mom what I was doing and all this stuff. And then it was like, all of a sudden I had my website out, but I didn't get that many people involved. And I feel like that was easier than to fold, because then it's like, well, no one's really watching and I can just give up. So I feel like mentors are that support. It's also that like kind of like an invisible support mechanism throughout the work week, even if you don't have a meeting set up with one of them.
I think it's really about the accountability. And I think that's really smart accountability that's what really mentors bring. And then also being able to bring problems. It sounds like a little bit of what you're saying is it's easy to be like, oh, this isn't working. I'm maybe embarrassed, or like, I feel like I should just have this kind of image of what we see on social media of like incredible entrepreneurs just busting through figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, massive exits, and I think we see that a lot. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're like, oh, this isn't me. Can I tell anybody that? Or should I just like pretend like that didn't happen and hope for the best for the next time? Do you get people wanting you to be their mentor because of the businesses that you started? And what kind of advice do you generally tend to give?
Yeah, I have. And actually, recently, a friend of my girlfriend's was starting a brand, and we had like several meetings where she was asking me questions about just starting the business that she wanted to start. And there were questions about like the business side and marketing, and asking me about my experiences. And I always like find it like super humbling. I always feel like I don't never approach it from a place of like, oh, let me tell you like what you need to do so that you're successful. Because it's like, I mean, it's a journey, and every day you're trying to figure it out yourself. So I feel like that's why I'm always a little skeptical too of like the YouTube channels and social media personalities that are always like, here's this course, or listen to me and you're going to do this, or, like you said, make $1 million or whatever. But definitely it's humbling. And the number one thing I think is like testing things. Like I always tell people, like I can't, because eventually you start talking about the specific business. And this one, for example, was stationery. I've never purchased any stationery or any like decorative like notebook or anything like that. So as I think I try to keep myself out of giving feedback like, oh, this isn't going to work, or, oh, this design is great, this design is bad. I don't know about that kind of like stationary design. And so I think you just stay away from the actual specifics, and you try to say like, okay, well, have you tested this? Oh, this, like, that sounds like a good idea. Maybe if you talk to these people, try to sell it to them, maybe you can get that feedback to see if, they would be interested or how much they would be willing to pay. And so I think I just mostly ask questions on when I had those meetings, because it's like I love too when I approach people and I tell them my stuff and they give me a bunch of questions, because then it's like, okay, I'm not prepared. Like you got me on a few of those things. But if they tell me like, oh, that design sucks, I'd be like, well, what do you know?
It's not a good mentoring. That's what not to do in a mentoring.
Right, unless it's like, like I'm getting mentored from like the best jewelry company in the world, and I'm a jewelry, and then they're like, this sucks. Okay, fine. You know jewelry. But a lot of times mentorship is cross industry, and totally different from the specific product that you or them have experience in. So it's kind of, I try to not be a bad mentor, I guess.
There you go. I mean, trying is a critical piece to the part of mentoring in that relationship. I feel like so many folks don't try. It seems so simple, but it's like, you just got to kind of show up and care. I wanted to ask, when you were talking about your mentors and how their consistency really helped you kind of stay on track, there's always this kind of piece of, when do you start sharing like that you might not be feeling good about some things? Because like in the beginning, mentees are always like, hey, I'm going to bring energy, I'm going to bring excitement. But especially as a business owner, you don't need to tell me. I'm sure there's been some days where pulling your hair out, you don't know where cash is going to come from next, sales are down, whatever. Is there something that kind of clicks in you about when it feels comfortable to start sharing like, hey, things aren't always rosy. This could be terrible. It's only like a 10% chance, but it could be terrible.
Yeah, I'm smiling because, Jimmy, I don't have that problem at all. I grew up with all of the people I mentioned. It's like kind of like a thing, I think, in our family. Like, no matter how good you're doing, it's going terrible. Whenever I talk to any of my uncles, any business that I was around when I was a kid, okay, even my mom's business, when they were doing really well, horrible year, like all of the bad news. So I really don't have that problem. I usually come to meetings and people tell me like, well, why aren't you celebrating this, that? Why aren't you stopping to see that achievement? And because I'm like on the negative, like 99% of what I bring is like the problems. I don't care to talk about the good stuff, because that, to me, that I think probably a balance would be better. But but I try to just bring all the problems, bring all the negativity. Sometimes, I am looking for a little, I think, every entrepreneur has to be, when it's like, especially if it's something like really creative, like, everything is, because even like, the logo, like our logo, like when you're a small company, like the founder, like you're involved in doing everything that sees the light of your brand. And so you're, self-conscious about it. So sometimes you come with like, hey, I don't know about how I feel about that, or I feel like that's not going to work. I feel like, and you're kind of like fishing for a little support. And I think that's the way I am. I have to balance actually being the always positive kind of CEO, or like the you see some, I think, who are like, oh, like always zen and always like positive, and then the next day they ran out of cash and they shut down. So it's like, I don't know. I think I like my approach better.
I love it. At first, I thought, when you said I don't have that problem, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, Tekla prints cash. Life is good, man. Like,
no, terrible.
That's the answer I was hoping for at first. So it was just, it cracked me up. So let me flip that then. How do you, if you are used to kind of bringing the negatives, because I think most mentees are used to bringing the positive, how do you help the mentee feel comfortable when you're giving advice, when you're asking questions? Like, do you have something that you can like suddenly, maybe it's just a feeling where you're like, oh, this person's starting to trust me and share, or, something you say, like maybe it's even like a humbling statement where you're like, oh yeah, today like XYZ went terrible. How are things for you? You kind of already like kind of set up the playing field.
Yeah. I think the first thing I can empathize on is that a lot of conversations like this that I've had, I can relate that when I'm having a meeting with one of my mentors, I'm very self-conscious about what I'm saying sometimes. Like if I'm explaining a new project that I'm doing, then it's like, okay, this is the idea we have on like the marketing thing. And, obviously like, I don't think they can I don't think they would say like, oh, it seems like you're lacking confidence on this, but I know that it's a test, it's a hypothesis. And so I'm like trying to really describe accurately what we're trying to do. And you're always trying to like, describe it in a way that other people are like, oh, that's a good idea. That makes sense. That's so, you're always pitching, right? You're always pitching, I think, when you're a founder. And so I'm pitching my marketing project, and I can tell that when it's inverse, when I'm like the mentor, the first thing I want to do is make him like confident and calm, that like, yeah, just like, tell me what the idea is, and don't hold anything back, like basically like create a safe space, because I feel like when you're pitching anything, like you feel like you're being judged, especially when you're like founder and telling you my idea. And I feel people's tone change, like when I'm talking to people and we're not in something like this, and then they tell you something totally confident, normal, and then when it's like, okay, I have this idea I want to talk to you about, then it's like you start kind of just feeling a little self-conscious about what you're saying, because the other person is like listening and you feel like they're judging what you're saying. So I think the first thing is probably like create that environment where people feel safe to share and safe to just really like dig into the idea, and that all ideas are good. It's kind of like that thing about like there's no bad questions. I mean, when you're talking about entrepreneurship, like just pitch it good, and then let's like work on things or ask some questions, poke some holes, see if there's some weaknesses to it. But obviously like the idea thing for a lot of entrepreneurs is like really personal. So it's like, you're gonna maybe be judged, maybe it's a stupid idea or something like that. So I think creating that safe space is super important, because then you create that really like that environment where you can say anything, and then I think like you're actually fixing problems. Because like if you watch like TV, or you're watching like you're on social media, like you guys were saying, like the picture looks totally different, right? Like everything is success, everything is new funding rounds and new things going on. And so that kind of like, you don't realize that really like business is just like day-to-day problems, really. Like every business has the same kind of challenges. And so at the end of the day, I think it's less glamour than it seems.
Gino, I know you're talking about challenges. AugMentors prints money. Life is good. That's a joke.
But Gino, okay, I love this. Pitch it good. I haven't heard that before, so I love that. But I want to give you the opportunity. Pitch it. What do you do? Tell us about your company. And we'll tell you whether or not it sucks or not.
It's good. Yeah, you can be judging it. Yeah, well, for the past 10 years.
Well, first, hold on, Gino. Did we do a good job to create a safe space?
Yes. No, I feel like, especially with Tekla, after 10 years, I think you kind of get a little more comfortable talking about the business. But I'm more referring to like when you have it's like maybe a new business you're bringing up, and it's like, it's really nerve wracking to even share the idea, or fear that it's being judged, by the market eventually, which is the important thing, but it's being judged even by your parents, if you're telling your parents or your siblings or friends. But no, at Tekla for the past 10 years, we've been working with US companies, mostly technology and software companies, helping them recruit and identify talent in Latin America. So it's a company that obviously really close to my heart, because obviously I'm from Peru, and most of our team is from Latin America. And so our focus has always been to really help top talent in countries like Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, find those, opportunities with US technology companies, which it's obviously historically and still the case that the top technology companies are coming out of the US. And of course, Latin America is growing, and every region is, I think, putting in a lot of effort to, in a way, catch up, right? Of course, to everyone's the next Silicon Valley. So that tells you that still the US is number one in tech. But there's a lot of great talent in LATAM. And so we try to help companies and candidates, connect and be able to work together remotely.
I think it sounds great. How does mentoring fit? I'd be really curious when you're bringing in sort of these new team members, right? You have a cultural difference, potentially. You have a legitimate cultural difference between Latin America and North America. And then, of course, you have the corporate culture to get adjusted to, potentially, sort of work timing. Like, how does mentoring fit into your ways of integrating your teams onto their assignments?
Yeah, that's the number one thing that we've invested time and money and really everything into the past few years, is mentoring candidates to be able to be at the level in every single way, not just technical skills, but really more soft skills. So what you were saying, but also mentoring the hiring managers in the US, because like you were saying, it's not just a one-way street, it's two cultures. If the company, most of our clients are companies that come to us and they already maybe have 300 employees. They're, I don't know if that's a small, mid-sized company, but definitely it's not just like two founders. It's some larger companies, and they have a lot of management layers. And so it's also mentoring them on, okay, this is what you can expect on interviews. This is what you should know, and this is how you should approach it. And same with the candidates. And so on the candidate side, we've spent a lot of time specifically on what you said on corporate culture and work culture. That's where we see the biggest friction. I mean, when it's like interviews, the first 5 minutes, and it's like our warm up, for example, before the podcast, where we're just chatting and we're talking about igloos and college and stuff. And that is fine. Like, obviously, there's a lot of cultural similarities between Latin America and the US. And so great conversation there. But a lot of the times it's when the process gets into the later interviews or even working together, that's really working together is when like the first month is where we work with candidates the most to like ask them, how are you feeling at the new company? How are things going? And we've had these like YouTube episodes where we've interviewed some of them, and they were really frank in saying like, hey, like my manager like was really blunt, and I didn't know if they were mad at me, if they were unhappy with my work. I wasn't used to the way that the manager communicated. And at first I was kind of skeptical about the whole international business and so many work cultures. Like back when I was in college, I was like, no, that doesn't exist. That's not as important. And then, I mean, running this company, you really, really realize how everything is important. I've even heard candidates say like, my manager just writes to me about work, doesn't even say hi or how was your weekend or how are you? And in, Latin culture, like you have to start with like, oh, good morning. Like it's so crazy. Even me with like the people that I work with really closely, we get it out of the way, like knowing that it's just like, okay, hello, good morning and everything. But you have to kind of work yourself a little into the work stuff versus like, I'm sure in the US, like there's a lot of cultures that's like copy paste, like where's this assignment? How's this coming? When's this? It doesn't seem like it, but yeah, the pace and the work culture is really different. So yeah, a lot of mentoring that our recruiters do with candidates, and that everyone is equipped at our company to be able to help candidates in whatever stage they're in.
So would you say there's a difference also in how leaders act in high performing teams across the US and in Latin America, where if in Latin America, it's everybody and any level is going to be saying, hello, how's the weekend? What's going on? Whereas, in the US, is there something different? Like, is there a difference in how those like initial interactions go down with just better leaders?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like at that leadership level, I don't know if I have the best, sort of view of like that C-suite in Latin America and like comparing to that C-suite in the US, but definitely the US has this hustle culture that is just the way that business works in the US. And I see it permeating globally because of pop culture, TV, Shark Tank, everything like that, right? And so, yeah, definitely.
Silicon Valley.
There's Shark Tank Colombia, and there's like Shark Tank like Mexico and Latin America, and it's like it's gonna be like cutthroat kind of thing. The sharks have to be pretty like Kevin O'Leary type thing, and a lot of them are in those shows, even in Latin America, where like they're not like that in real life. Like it's different than. But that's like the kind of like the view that we have, I think, in the US of like hustle culture. And I see that a lot in Latin America now with like new entrepreneurs that, contact me to be like a mentor and just talk to me about their ideas, and we talk about their businesses, and they're definitely like really hustling. And yeah, that's definitely different than even 10 years ago. Like when I first started Tech Lab, this was 10 years ago in Peru, and you can tell the difference in like the entrepreneurship hustle culture. But otherwise, I mean, as far as the leadership teams, I don't spend too much time with like current Latin American like COOs or C-suites. So I don't know. I know that definitely things are still a little different from the meetings that I'm like in, but I don't have enough info, I think.
Gino, I have a question. Since it sounds like you've integrated a lot of teams in different ways, what would be the one piece of advice you have for a new person coming onto a new team, right? You have sort of setting somebody up for success in your business. What would be the advice for the person coming in, and what would be the advice for somebody onboarding somebody new? Just that one piece of advice.
I think onboarding is expectations. Like from the get-go, be very clear about first of all, you have to know what your expectations are of the hire. And you have to then make those expectations very clear to the hire. And then I think for the candidate, it's the same thing. I think you have to understand what the expectations are going to be, because it happens. I mean, it happens to us as a company when we're hiring, because even as a recruiting company, it's not like you're perfect in hiring. Like obviously you spend a lot of time optimizing that, but we ourselves notice this, and all of the companies we work with and the candidates, it's like the interview process can never be like the real thing. It's like training versus the actual match. And so like things are different, even if you try to make it as similar to the real thing as possible. And so a lot of the times it's the expectations. Like candidates will say, like, I was not expecting this to be as fast paced. And maybe even on the hiring manager side too, it's like, I wasn't expecting A, B, and C to be a problem. And so, yeah, I think that's the number one thing.
Expectations.
Yeah. What's the biggest concern that new potential people who you interview at Tekla to then place at a U.S. firm, what do they usually say is their biggest concern about a U.S. workforce?
When it's their first time working internationally, then I think it's just a lot of times the confidence. Like they're not confident that their English is good enough for their communication. They're not sure if they're at the level. I think we have a lot of that in Latin America. We don't feel like we're at the level in a lot of things. And obviously the US being like number one in many aspects, from business to athletics, it's like you do have to work with candidates and let them see that they are prepared, because we've seen it. We're like, you are prepared. Like your communication skills are great. Your English is great. You can really talk about the technology and the actual development work that you've done, and the technical skills are great. So you're going to do well. And so a lot of times it's that self-sabotage, I think, for a lot of candidates that are new to the experience. Yeah, it's a big step for a lot of the candidates, for sure. It's a big step. I mean, some of the companies we work with are really, really awesome companies, like real big names that you'd be like, oh, I don't know, like I can't do that, And even in the US, I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. Like when it's like a company that has that name, like I'm sure Facebook, like, I mean, if you're interviewing for Facebook or Google, those are companies where you're like, I don't think I fit in there, and you kind of self-sabotage. But sometimes it does take a mentor to tell you, like, no, like, you can do this based like accurately, not just like a pep talk. Like everyone needs a good pep talk, but like anyone, your family or friends can do that. But like an accurate, like, no, I really, really think you have all of what you need for this job. So I think that's the number one thing, is that unknown, and kind of like
helping people get out of their heads a little bit. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And the benchmarking, it's their first time, so they don't know. They're like, well, I don't think I'm at the level, and they don't have anything to like compare against.
And they don't necessarily hear feedback like that unless it's somebody who the individual thinks cares about them. Like if I just walked on the street and somebody was like, hey, you're gonna have a great day, I'm like, okay, thanks, buddy. That's very different than,
does that happen in Baltimore?
All the time. Yeah. Especially by the park. But no, but that's like was my takeaway from what you just said, Gino, that like, hey, you need to develop some of this rapport and listen and have some vulnerable conversations before you can actually tell somebody, hey, here's a benchmark you should hold. Yeah. Even if that person hasn't actually physically been to that benchmark or seen it themselves, they can then firewalk with your words because they know you care about them.
Yeah, the really cool thing is when we see a lot of the candidates that we've mentored, they've become mentors. Then they are like active on LinkedIn, and they're sharing their tips and insight on how to, and then they can do it better than us, really, because they're obviously they've actually had the job, and the job that other people want. And I think that's huge, like mentorship, and on the candidate side, and not just internationally, but like in the US, every candidate you look up to, find that person that has that job that you want, or find that person that is in the position that you want to be in. I feel like that has to be the best mentorship. I mean, in mine, I don't know if you guys disagree or have other viewpoints, but that, it's kind of like,
it's definitely one main aspect of it. Even as you were sharing before, Gino, like if somebody comes and says, I want to make a stationery company with these beautiful notebooks, you're like, cool. I don't have really an opinion on, lined versus unlined or sparkles, but like I get how to run a business. So I think there's advice you can always give just as an outside perspective, but lived experience. And that's why I think for entrepreneurs, having other entrepreneurs as mentors who have actually lived the experience is the most valuable, but other people's experience is really valuable as well. So I think it's really cool to hear about folks who have had the experience, they've firewalked, they've gone through the hard times, they've gone through the adjustments, been like, what is wrong with these Americans? Can't they just like calm the F down? And like, why are they working 100 million hours? And why are they shooting me these like terrible notes saying like, get your stuff done? And, but then to be like, okay, that's just how they are. Like, that's how they've been raised. That's what they believe is like the right thing to do.
They're just feral animals.
So
just only Zoom with them, don't meet in person.
Feral animals.
Society. Yeah. It's society's fault.
Just don't put your hand near their mouths and you'll be fine. But to hear that, like, it's going to be okay. And I think that's sometimes just what you need to hear from a mentor, right? Like what you're going through is normal and it's going to be okay.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. And I find it really funny that's kind of like definitely what we take out of my description of the U.S. work culture is just like, yeah, I mean, I'm part of it. So I have that, like, I have that hybrid, I think, culture. And I mean, I'm more of like a hustle type work as well. And so I find myself also like a lot of the times. And so it's an exercise. You find yourself like, you make sure that every person you speak to, you know, the right way to communicate, because it's not a matter of like people working faster or slower than each other. It's just really, it's all about communication. I think that's it. And like the cultural norms and stuff. And even like, you know, remote makes it hard because sometimes you don't have the physical and the tone and, you know, the typical things. And so it's even more apparent when you're working internationally that you have to, you know, be careful about how things come through. But yeah, no, but
you know, I have a question that I'm going to lead with an anecdote, but it's going to be about your leadership and how from the top you kind of set the culture, which obviously is going to influence your recruiting at Tekla for your staff, not just the folks who you place. Mm-hmm. But when we first got introduced via email, I went to your website, and I don't know if you know or remember, but in the middle of your first page of the website, you say top companies trust Tekla to augment their LATAM recruitment. And I was like, okay, Gino and I will be friends. You know, he's got augment in the middle of the website. We're AugMentors. This will work. So
augmentation is a huge word for us. We use like, I think that's like our top word on our website and everything, because like that's how like the business model, I think, has gotten this trend in staffing of being like an augmentation of the workforce and stuff. So,
and again, it's a reason we should get along when you can have names that overlap and can be punny. Life is better.
Yeah.
So as you're augmenting other companies' hiring practices, what do you do as a leader thinking about, you know, how you communicate, or, you know, how you represent yourself, which is how you represent the company externally? As the CEO, Gino, and as the leader, how do you set the tone for hiring? How do you set the tone for your company's culture for bringing on new people to Tekla? And how do you like what's the biggest improvement you've made in the last 10 years in like your style of leadership, so that when people do come on board, they more instantaneously go, oh yeah, I get it. I get what Tekla is as a culture, and this is how I can be part of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's like one of the hardest things, I think, is to really set that culture, or, you know, that word that has been so, I feel like the word culture for startups it went from like, you know, maybe 10 years ago, it was like everyone was talking about culture. Then it had a bad rap for a little bit, and it was like culture is just about people hiring other people like themselves, right? I don't know if you guys remember that phase of the word culture, but in entrepreneurship, then it took that negative approach. It was more like a bias.
Like, oh, you don't fit our culture, which means you don't look like us.
Yeah, exactly. You don't look like us, talk like us, or our word, you know, we wouldn't be friends. And everyone wanted to be a family and friends and stuff like that. And like every startup, right? And I don't like that at all. Like when I think about culture, it really is like the core of it, just like mutual respect and communication and empathy, like the core values. But then I think that with that, you can hire anywhere in the world. You can, you know, build great things with people, yeah, anywhere in the world. But definitely.
So, you know, is there one change you've made in the last 10 years where you're like, oh, I need to position this and be consistent about it differently?
I don't think I can think of one specific change, but I mean, we definitely hire more for diversity, and not just like the diversity of like the stat on a sheet of like, oh, we have so many females, we have so many, people of color. Like, no, not that, but just like cross industry, cross like their experience, like they've worked in different things, because, gender, sex, everything, all of that is obvious that shouldn't matter when you're hiring. That's obvious. But then also like be open to people with different experiences and backgrounds professionally. Like obviously personally really matters too, but professionally, like just from different backgrounds and stuff. And so, yeah, I think that's been the biggest change there, Jimmy, like the personality. Like when we're interviewing, like, does this person have the right personality? Are they interested in what we're doing? And do they really feel that same like LATAM thing that we do to like try to like represent Latin America in a positive light? And like, do they really share the values? And I think those we always tell companies that like companies are so quick in technology hiring to be like, they have everything, but they have only worked with Angular 2 and not Angular 3. So reject it. And it's like, really? They can't look at one documentation and pick that up in like a week, because the soft skills of that person are so much more important. So I think hiring for character and personality, I mean, personality in the sense of like, not if like you're going to be friends with that person. That really doesn't matter if you're going to be friends with that person outside of work, but more in terms of character. Yeah, I think that's the word, is hire for character. And obviously then the skills can be built if they're lacking in some areas.
Yeah, I love it. Hire for the soft skills.
Yeah.
Took away from that.
Yeah. We've made that change internally, and we've tried to get clients to also do, and we've noticed it actually through the pandemic and after now the pandemic, more companies are focusing on that than before. I don't know what specifically about the time period, about obviously many things happened and changed in work culture with the pandemic, but I don't know exactly what, but coming out of it, a lot more companies are like, let me tell you about all the soft skills that I need. Whereas before pandemic, I swear it was like, let me tell you about all the technologies that they need to know. And then, they need to communicate and all that stuff. So it's been crazy to see the difference. I don't know what did it. Maybe remote work and people, I don't know what it was.
Gino, thank you so much for your time. Before we roll, though, I want to go through a brief rapid fire word association with you.
Oh, crap.
So I'm going to give you 4 words, and whatever verbal Rorschach test comes to mind for you. So if I say the word mentor, what do you think of?
Family for me.
How about mentee?
Support.
The word sponsor?
Growth.
And lastly, coach.
I don't know if I can give you one word for coach, but I love, like, coach to me, that's like the most important thing that everyone should have, like a coach. And that's why, like, I feel like team sports, I feel like team sports huge in every person, and not just like athletics, but like anything team or like group oriented. When you're growing up and you have a coach, that's huge to me. Like some of the most important people in my life were my coaches, and like the lessons really have helped me in everything I've done, like work and also personal life. So yeah, I would say critical for coach.
Yeah, critical.
Okay. I needed that whole time to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. You define rapid fire a little differently, but I like critical a lot. Actually, we haven't had that before. That was wonderful. Well, Gino, thank you so much, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Your message about both consistency and now like consistently thinking about the soft skills, I think that's a big deal, and you've obviously demonstrated that over the last 10 years.
Thank you so much for your time. Can I tell you the first thing I loved about Gino?
No, only the last. Quick. The last thing for me was jewelry. Who knew? I mean, I could tell that Gino had an attention to detail, but he had experience making jewelry, and what a wonderful like lens to approach problem solving.
Yes, it's so it is. It's very detail oriented. Is able to use a lot of different skills and senses that apparently have really helped him in all of the work he's done. But of course, for me, it's all about the mom. So I loved that his mom was his early mentor, and I could totally imagine the conversations of him being like, okay, look, mom, here's what I want to do. Here's my marketing plan. And his mom being like, okay, that's nice, and kind of like, okay. But then later being like, actually, here's somebody you should talk to. So I think that's really fun. I guess just my mom has had a million dreams about different businesses she wanted to start. She actually probably thought of Mrs. Fields cookies before Mrs. Fields, and she loved talking about business ideas. So that was like kind of a topic of conversation for us, as it is with my family as well. So I really related to that part. That's where I immediately was hooked to Gino's story.
I heard cookies. I don't understand.
I lost you. You like the yummy smell and like the gooey, delicious ones
that come out without being baked, gooey and delicious. That concerns somebody who has experience in packaged food goods.
It's okay. It's all good. We all survived.
Other than Gino also being in love with the word augment, I was really taken by Gino with what he said at the end. I mean, what we just listened to, where he was talking about that hiring for character and hiring for soft skills is actually the hard skill for organizations. And that was fascinating to me because everybody puts in these prerequisites. For example, I was looking at a prerequisite list today.
Oh no, are you looking for a job?
Always, Julie. Get me out of here. Get me behind this mic. I can't move. And it was saying things like, you need 5 years of tax accounting work and 5 years of being a CPA. Great. I then looked at all of the job requirements for my friend. Of the 15 different bullets of like what you're going to be doing on a responsibilities, roles basis, 2, maybe 3 mentioned the word tax in like a preparation. That means the majority, almost 80% of the line items were all about soft skills and then maybe a little bit about organization, like budgeting, planning, communication on time. It was all soft skills and it just cracked me up. I'm like, oh yeah, we're talking about Gino later today. And like Gino said, yeah, that's the hard part.
Totally. It is the hard part. And I think you and I have spent a lot of time talking about how do organizations account for that? How can they find out if somebody has these soft skills? Because there's no like certificate to show that you are somebody with soft skills, and there's no class that you can get a diploma from. No one can tell if you have a GPA for charisma. So how are you supposed to know?
Charisma is the easy one to tell, Julie. Of all the soft skills, you choose charisma. Okay. That's good.
But yeah, how can you tell on somebody's resume if they have charisma or not? Or if they have like good active listening skills, or they're able to practice empathy? None of those soft skills are part of any of these job descriptions of which you mentioned.
It's going to be very hard to see empathy in anything written unless you are yourself very empathetic. I agree. But I do think that it's funny that you brought up charisma first, because that is probably the one thing that actually jumps off because of the excitement. But no, you're totally right. I'm giving you a hard time. But yeah, these soft skills are just so critical, and Gino sees it every day. So it was really interesting to hear, especially how he mentors, even coaches, assists both his staff and his clients how to get through these cultural differences and unlock the soft skills that everybody has within them. We start with almost everybody has these abilities ready to go. It's just sometimes very hard based upon our emotional bandwidth, how busy we are, other frustrations. And if you can take a step back, be humble, avoid self-sabotage and negative thoughts, you're really going to change the way your relationships are. And I mean, it sounds simple, but Gino laid out how hard it can be, but how critical it is for business. Gino clearly figured it out.
Totally. And like you said, I love how that's a big part of his coaching for his team, but also for his clients. And how can you create that sort of cross-cultural, and I think cross-cultural business opportunities are actually a way to just learn how to communicate better, because you're not coming from a shared language. You have to communicate more slowly, more not like speaking slowly, but you have to be more clear in what you're asking. You have to be more specific, and in a way that really forces you to kind of slow down and be more thoughtful.
Wait, Julia, are you telling people in 2023 to take a breath, smile, and then talk? You're brilliant. Why did anybody else think of that?
You can't see my middle finger on the podcast.
Julie for president. No, I'm actually giving you props. I'm like, this is the one time I'm not giving you a hard time. I think that's a big deal. Like
yeah, and it just forces you to have better communication. I think when you're always with people who are just like you and who you have a shorthand with, it makes it harder to slow. You don't have to practice those same skills. And I think as we're talking about diversity within organizations, not just, sort of across borders, but across cultures, across gender, across different kind of mindsets, I think it's really important to know that you have to slow down and communicate. And that's really what mentoring's here to do. to be able to create those bridges. So Gino was already an augmenter before he knew he was.
Through and through, and already setting expectations and like being attuned to each person. You might have different expectations in meetings for different people. Julie shows up dripping with charisma. You may need to say, all right, easy. We know you got it. Let's let somebody else step up. And that could be very different attunement coaching, but that's where the best, managers come from, like actually caring individually about each team member. Julie, I really love your point actually about take a deep breath and think before you talk. That will go a long way to connect better with others.
And I mean, I could try practicing it too.
You don't have to do that when you're on the podcast.
It's dead air. It's not good. But yeah, no, I loved this time with Gino, and it was really fun to get to spend time with him.
Thanks, Gino.
Thanks, Gino.
AugMentors out.
See ya. Wow, you've made it this far, and we thank you. Hopefully you enjoyed our episode and discovered new ways to bring more authentic connection into your mentoring relationships. Want to tell them more, Jimmy?
Be an augmenter with us. Visit our website for the best interactive mentoring content at augmentors.us. Share our podcast with someone you care about. Like and subscribe. And yes, really, you following our show and writing a review, it's a big deal. Your actions provide us with the resources to continue our undefeated, unencumbered, prize-winning productions. We welcome questions and suggestions via email hi@augmentors.us or on social with our handle @AugmentorsHQ. We are most active and available on LinkedIn and YouTube. Shout out and earnest thank you to our intrepid producer, Erlen Cato. We appreciate you. AugMentors out.
See ya.